Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Carney.
Hello,
Laurence Martin
Mr.
de
Carney,
Radio-Canada.
Radio-Canada.
Mr.
Carney, why did you say that Mr. Trump respect Canada's sovereignty during the call when he did talk about the 51st state? Let's be clear. I am always clear with everyone, in public, in private, including the President, when that question is raised. That will never happen. Never. And the President and myself agreed that Canada and the United States should begin negotiations in terms of our economic relations and security relations as sovereign nations after the election. And the comments made by the President yesterday emphasized the importance of the choice to be made by Canadians in this election. Who can and who will stand up to President Trump? Yes, but what did you answer Mr. Trump during your call when he talked about the 51st state? What did you say? I say to everyone, including to the President, I said it will never happen.
Next question. Prochaine question.
To be clear, as I've said to anyone who's raised this issue in private or in public, including the President, that it will never happen. And the President and I, when we spoke, we agreed that Canada and the United States, as sovereign nations, would begin negotiations on our economic and security relationship following the federal election. And I think the President's comments yesterday and before that just underscore how important the choice that Canadians have on Monday. Who can stand up to President Trump? Who can build Canada strong? Who has the experience in order to do that? That's the crucial choice that Canadians need to make.
Next question.
Good morning, Mr. Carney. Ashley Burke, CBC News. On March 28th, did President Trump bring up the idea of Canada becoming the 51st state during that call with you?
As I just said, the President brings this up all the time. He brought it up yesterday, he's brought it up before. There's a difference between the conversation that was held between leaders of government, which was this conversation, and a discussion that led directly to an agreement that as sovereign countries we would have negotiations about our partnership following the election on Monday. That's what the President and I agreed. That's what both of us reported back. And that's what I'm ready to do. And what's at stake in this election is how well we come together as a country for those difficult discussions with the Americans. And to be clear, you know, I have said well before that call and virtually every time that I've spoken since that call, that President Trump, the Americans, want to break us so they can own us. Those aren't just words. That's what's at risk. That's why we have to build Canada strong. That's why we have to go hard. That's why we have to negotiate properly. That's not why we have to build outside options. That's why we have the plan that we do.
I asked you about this on March 28th after the call, and you said that President Trump respected Canada's sovereignty both privately and in his public conversations.
He did.
Were you being truthful?
He absolutely did. He absolutely did. Look, the President has certain things in his mind that he reverts back to all the time, but treated me as the Prime Minister, not as something else. I'm not even going to say the word he used to use about my predecessor. Treated me as the Prime Minister. We had discussions as sovereign nations. We agreed as sovereign nations that these negotiations will begin after the election on Monday. And that is how it was reported back, and that's absolutely accurate. So that's the treatment. Now, look, the President says lots of things, but the essence of the discussion and where we moved the conversation to was exactly what I said. Treated us with respect as a sovereign nation. We have these negotiations coming, and that's, just to be clear, that is what's at stake. Both things are true. The desire of the Americans and the President to own us, those aren't just words, that's a desire. And the ability of Canada to stand strong, build our own, control our destiny, and in that context, as a sovereign nation, have those discussions.
Prochaine question. Next question. In respect to your colleagues, next question.
C'est presque la même question, en effet.
It's almost the same question.
Mais c'est déjà fait, c'est déjà traduit, je crois.
Next question.
Monsieur.
Hi, Mr. Carney, Mackenzie Gray with Global
Yeah.
News. I think you've ducked Ashley and Laurence's question, so I just give you one opportunity again. Yes or no, did Mr. Trump bring up the 51st state in his call with you?
I said that he did. I said that he did. But the President, to be clear, oui, il a soulevé. C'est correct?
Yes,
Mais il a soulevé.
he said that.
Il soulève.
But
Il a soulevé beaucoup d'enjeux.
he
Mais
talked
la
about a lot of
discussion
issues.
au sein, la
But
discussion au sein,
the
c'est une
discussion
de pays souverains.
was
Sorry,
a discussion between two sovereign countries.
Him raising something and then where the discussion is, he has these things in his mind. This is not news. He raises it all the time, okay? But then the question is, what's going to be done with it? And does he understand where we stand, but more particularly where I stand? He is under no illusions. Never, absolutely not, never. Move on. It's two sovereign nations coming together, negotiating our partnership, our relationship. And the question is, will there be a deal that's acceptable to Canada? There's a lot that will never be on the table in those negotiations, and I've been absolutely clear about that. Je viens de le dire, je crois.
I just said that.
Il faut le suivre.
You have to follow the discussion.
Beaucoup de questions, très rapide, je sais.
No, there are lots of
continue.
questions and it goes
Going
quickly.
forward, you've talked about that economic and security deal that you want to negotiate with the president. My colleague Brian Platt asked you yesterday about what conditions would be involved in sitting down with the president. One thing you didn't say was respect for Canada, which is something you previously said before. So I just want to be clear. Is that still something, respect for Canada, that needs to be done?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Look, this is not, this has to be a serious discussion, sovereign nations. That's what he and I agreed. It has to, that has to remain the case. It's not a photo op. It's not a visit to Mar-a-Lago. It's not any of those things. And I also want to be clear that these will be tough negotiations. These will be tough discussions. But that's why, that and many other reasons, is why we build Canada strong. It puts us in a better position. Look, we are absolutely clear, and I say this, but reality is behind it. We can give ourselves far more than the Americans can take away. And I'll put numbers on this just for a second. The Bank of Canada thinks worst case U.S. trade war, global trade war, it's about $125 billion off our economy a few years out. Just free trade in Canada is $200 billion for Canada. That's before all the investment we're talking about in housing. That's before the investment in energy. That's before the investment in new trade corridors and critical minerals and others, okay? So by building the country, this is why I'm so focused and we're so focused on building Canada strong. Yes, it's creating good jobs, a better future for our country, but it also gives us leverage. It gives us leverage in the negotiation. We don't have to do a deal in the short term. We will do the right deal. My government will do the right deal, the best deal for Canada. That's why I'm asking people for their vote, so we are in a position to accomplish it for them.
Prochaine question.
Michel Sabat, La Presse canadienne. Pourquoi ne pas avoir
Why
dévoilé
did you not reveal on March 28th that Mr. Trump had raised the question of the 51st state? And have you been transparent? Yes, yes, I am transparent. There was a call that happened, and there was a lot of things discussed. But what is important is the result of that call. And the conclusion drawn by the President and Canada, the same conclusion, a very constructive discussion, negotiations starting after the election. And the third point, I said to him, at that point, I said, we will impose counter tariffs in the auto sector. And I advised him of that. I did that. And I said to him, I will work very hard to win the confidence of Canadians in this election.
What's important, we talked about lots of things, okay? And what's important is the conclusions of the call, the results of the call. And those are exactly the same on the American side and the Canadian side, what President Trump's readout, our readout of the call. And those were that it was very constructive, number one. Number two, that we agreed to have these negotiations that would begin following this election, this crucial election that's happening on Monday. Thirdly, that I advised him that we would retaliate if they put in place auto tariffs. So I warned him of that, and we did, subsequently, as you know. And that I also observed the obvious point, but important to underscore it, that I would be working hard to gain the confidence of Canadians for the election on Monday, which is why, again, to underscore how crucial this election is for many reasons, but above all because of the stakes. To underscore again, the President, his ideas in his head, his designs, wants to break us so he can own us. The question is, who's going to stand up to that? I'm ready to do it.
Mr. Carney, en tout respect, vous n'avez pas
Mr. Carney, you did not answer the first part of my question, and I'm sure that it's going to come back in the coming hours and days if you don't. So I'd like you to answer it. Why did you not state on March 28th that Mr. Carney had raised that issue of the 51st state? And I will also ask my follow-up. Mr. Legault this morning, the Premier of Quebec, has again talked about immigration and presented his demands. Do you think his demands are legitimate, and will you agree to them? Now, with respect to the Quebec government's demands and goals with respect to immigration, primarily, I think it deals with asylum seekers. So yes, absolutely, I agree with him as to the need to bring down the level of temporary immigrants coming into Quebec. And as he knows, and you know as well, that is a shared responsibility between the federal government and Quebec, and we have to work in close cooperation to attain that goal.
Last question from the media delegation.
Il y en a trois questions.
Volet numéro 1.
Pardon?
What about on the first
Pardon,
part?
monsieur.
Le volet sur pourquoi pas avoir dévoilé
Why you didn't reveal that
Monsieur.
on March 28th?
Il y a plusieurs enjeux. On a discuté
Listen, there were a
plusieurs
number of issues that were discussed, and what is important is the conclusion of that call, the President's conclusion and the Prime Minister of Canada's conclusion. And in each case, those conclusions are clear. I said, no, it will never happen, and the conversations will continue.
Canadian Press. Mr. Carney, your party platform would add $130 billion in new measures to the fiscal framework. Can you spell out to Canadians what's your fiscal anchor? What's the precise metric or guardrail that you're using there?
Yeah, there's a couple of important fiscal anchors. One is that we believe that there should be no borrowing except for capital projects. To be more specific, if the government is going to borrow, assets need to be created. most of those assets will be created in the private sector. Through investment tax credits, for example, accelerated depreciation or other projects. First point. The second is that a stable and then declining debt to GDP ratio, which is what our platform does achieve. It achieves both. And I think the third I would add to that, which is critical, is absolute transparency. So transparency about the measures, transparency about the difference between capital and operating, transparency about the forecasts. And we would reinforce the Parliamentary Budget Office. And I just draw a very clear distinction between our platform, which is very clear and transparent, got the highest rating from the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy, headed by the ex-head of the Parliamentary Budget Office, Kevin Page. Their detailed analysis, higher rating than all the other parties. And included one fundamental aspect here, which is we didn't play fiscal tricks with phantom growth and dynamic accounting in order to massage the numbers. No, the numbers are clear. We hold to them.
And speaking of numbers, are there any specific metrics or numbers that you can share about what you have in mind?
Sorry, as I said a moment ago, if you look at debt to GDP as an overall anchor, and then the composition of the deficit being a crucial aspect.
We'll take one question from local media.
Okay.
Mr. Carney, Joe Sadowski with City News Vancouver. While the proposed increase in the RCMP personnel, CBSA officers, and funding for treatment and youth mental health initiatives is a step towards addressing the toxic drug crisis, how will the government ensure that these measures effectively target the root causes of this crisis and evolving other methods like that? And what's your government going to do?
Yeah, thank you for the question. You capture both ends of it. Rightly, which is what we're trying to do, obviously in partnership with the province of BC, and then down through law enforcement, first responders, health professionals, and beyond. Social workers, very important part of this. We're going to control the borders better on both sides. We're going to do more on law enforcement. We're going to tighten the penalties in and around this. But then very importantly, going to the root causes, and there are many, but some that we can most directly affect are, again, working in partnership, but around homelessness, deeply affordable housing. The absence of deeply affordable housing is a huge challenge for this, and that is why our housing program is so ambitious, and that is why our housing program has a big element of the government driving things, because if we just leave it to the market, as basically has been done for the last 20, 25 years, it won't happen. So that's why we're stepping up. And then secondly, as you mentioned briefly, and I mentioned in my remarks, and there's a lot behind what I'm about to say, is a very deliberative focus around mental health, youth mental health, permanent programs being put in place so professionals can rely on those, plan, build that out. We do have a mental health crisis in this country, and the knock-on effects of that and being amplified through the horrors of addiction are deeply painful. And I think, within many in this room, I would say, would have experience with that. So,
thank you.
Jared Yeager with the Western Standard. Just following up on the drug crisis. So Gregor Robertson, your candidate for Vancouver, Fraserview, South Burnaby, he was one of the leading advocates for drug decriminalization, and while he was mayor of Vancouver, overdoses increased by 600%. So why should people in the Lower Mainland trust the Liberals after seeing firsthand the lasting damage caused by your candidate's policies?
I think there are many causes of this crisis. And so we're attacking them from our perspective across a range of them. I just gave a detailed answer to those elements, and we'll continue to do it. A multi-pronged strategy that also, again, has to work in close collaboration with the province of BC. Thank you.
Merci, c'est ce qui met fin à la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui.
Okay. Bon, merci.
That was Liberal leader Mark Carney speaking in Port Moody, British Columbia. And just to sort of set the stage here first, the riding Port Moody Coquitlam is a BC battleground as the NDP candidate